With that, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, we're just gonna give another minute or so here, and then I'll get started.
Thank you.
Okay, it is about 6:05. I'm going to go ahead and get started here just to be cognizant of people's time. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Marc Lyons. I am the Planning Services Manager for the City of Oshkosh, and really appreciate you joining tonight as we host a online public input session for our strategic housing needs assessment that the city commissioned. A couple other city staff are on the line as well. Colleen Iforth, our Community Development Director, and Alexa Najunas, who is one of the associate planners with the planning division. Going to go through a little bit of a PowerPoint we have for you tonight to kind of go over some of the background of the plan, some of the market study and demographic information that was done as part of the plan, and then end with talking about some of the policy and recommendation things that are outlined within the plan. As of this time, our anticipation is that we'll be going to Plan Commission on March 1st for their hopeful approval of the plan, and then ultimately on to Common Council on March 8th, with a goal of having them approve the plan at that time. Once that plan would be approved, we would then begin working on implementation steps from the plan. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. A little bit of background: the city did do a request for proposal back in the late 2020 and selected RDG Planning and Design to assist with the study, and that plan kicked off in 2021. Like I said, now here we are in early 2022, hopefully wrapping up the plan. So a little bit about tonight's presentation. We're going to talk about some community perceptions that took place during the early portion of the plan. The city staff and our consultant hosted a number of stakeholder interview meetings, as well as some other Polco surveys, some other community surveys that went out to help gather some of the information that really helped shape the community perception and some of the direction of this plan. The city did also engage a technical advisory committee made up of members of the community. From there, we're also going to talk about some demographic and economic information from the plan. Then we're going to look a little bit at the current housing market. And then we're going to end by talking about housing policy and potential housing program changes the city may employ as a result of this plan. So first, talking about a little bit of some of the major issues that came up during the community perception portion of the study. So lack of inventory was one of the themes, gaps at some of the lower rent levels, and then obviously the very high cost of construction materials that the pandemic has only furthered. A need for middle cost development was identified, as well as aging construction community. The demographic information for the community does show that we do have a rising median age within the city, which also led to a demand for maintenance provided units, so units that may have their lawn or snow removal included in their unit. Additional community perceptions were that there was an interest in the city engaging in alternative housing types, whether that be condos or townhomes, or maybe small multifamily, but types of units that maybe are not existing in our current market. And with that goes working towards neighborhood acceptability of new housing types, whether it be more duplexes, triplexes, some of our residential areas, or increasing some of those alternative types in the condos and townhome type uses. And then also one of the major themes that came up was that the city has a lack of retaining executive housing in the city. We don't really have any very high-end housing, and people that are looking for that housing market are choosing outside of Oshkosh. So we have some needs that were identified through the community perception on the very low end, the middle, and the high end. And that is kind of theme of this plan. We did note that there's a number of deficiencies in all housing types within the city of Oshkosh. Talking a little bit about the community survey that went out, there was a number of questions asked through that survey, and some of the best chances for success, based on the polling done as part of the survey was that mid 3-bedroom size homes would be good for the community. Small 2 and 3-bedroom homes could be good for the community, as well as more independent and senior living. Townhouses and row homes were a needed market, and then additional mixed use development within the city. From availability price range standpoint, the lowest perceived availability for rent was about $1,000 a month for renters and $300,000 for owners. Obviously, there's a significant portion of our community that needs rents under that, so we definitely have some work to do there. What were some of the major unmet markets that were identified through that survey? Workforce housing, families with children, and then that generational family housing seemed to be deficient. As you can see, kind of the highest percentage was at almost 60% of people feeling that we're not adequately meeting the needs for our workforce housing, individuals making under $15 an hour. And then closely behind that at about 44% was that we needed additional housing for families. And again, these are the results of the survey, not necessarily demographic information, but what was identified during the survey. So that led to some of the kind of community vision. What are some things that need to take place? So the sample questions used to assist with that are, for example, does Oshkosh need or would you support the use of public funding for home repair or rehabilitation assistance? We had a very high percentage at about 74% of individuals felt that yes, public funding should be used for home repairs and rehabilitation assistance. Similarly, does Oshkosh need or would you support programming and services for people without permanent homes? So transitional housing options, homelessness in the city. And about almost 74% of respondents during that question answered similarly, yes, they would support the use of public funding for that. Just 2 more sample questions during the public engagement process. Does Oshkosh need or would you support the use of public funding to remove dilapidated housing? Again, a very high response rate at about 73.5% felt it was appropriate to use public funding for that. One that we did want to include, because it does show a different breakdown of how people responded to this, is does the city and would you support greater enforcement of maintenance codes? And that the city was about split. About 50% of people felt yes, they would support greater enforcement, and 30% said no, and then we had about 20% undecided. So just wanted to show a little bit about how there were some varying answers through the questions. Some of the population trends, now moving out of the background research and surveys that were done and looking at more demographic information from the census and some of the ACS data sources out there. On the far left, we do have a historic population growth from 1960 to 2020. What I really want to point out there is the top line is Winnebago County. The bottom line is the city of Oshkosh. We do have a smaller population growth here locally in Oshkosh than we are seeing elsewhere within our own county. Similarly, looking at some other mid-size cities in the area from 2010 to 2020. As you can see, Oshkosh there again has a lower growth rate than some peer communities with Fond du Lac, Neenah, Appleton, La Crosse, and Green Bay. And then as I mentioned a little bit earlier, looking at our age groups of our population from 2010 to 2019, we have lost percentage-based population in the emerging ages, 18 to 24. Our established age groups are the middle age, 25 to 54, and then a rise in our percentage of our seniors. So we do have a lot more aging in place going on within our community that does need to be addressed as we move forward. Looking at some of the changes in housing. So between 2000 and 2020, we did see about a 1.2% shift in our makeup of owner-occupied versus renter-occupied. Presently, as of the 2019 data, we were at about 55% owner-occupied to 45% renter-occupied in our community, which is, as I said, a little bit of a shift of about 1.2% from what it was back in 2020. Vacancy rates have substantially dropped in the community, especially in those rental markets. So we do have a very low vacancy rate. Looking at previous development in the city has been averaging about 135 new housing units annually over the last 10 years. with nearly 80% of those being in the multifamily development. We really have a very slow period of single family construction and new single family development here in Oshkosh. So taking that a little bit further and starting to look at housing affordability in our market. So this on the left side really starts to just break down the paying of rental units and how they compare of 2010 versus 2019 by pure numbers and percentages. And then on the right is the percentage of income compared to a mortgage rate. So in generally, fewer Oshkosh residents are overburdened, or excuse me, fewer Oshkosh residents are overburdened by rent or mortgage costs, but we do have definitely a more rent burden falling onto our rental community than our single family community. This is a slide that has been shown a lot over the last couple of years. There's been a couple of different iterations of it as the plan moved forward. So this is a breakdown of kind of affordability based on income ranges. The very low or extremely low income of that 0 to 25,000, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and then you can see it continues to go up. And this is where Oshkosh frequently ranks as a affordable community by national standards. And that is because in that $25,000 to $50,000 income range, we have a surplus of what's considered housing stock there. We have about 7,600 rental and owner-occupied units over what our income breakdown of our community would necessarily say we should support. But that's where we know in our local community, maybe our local standards for affordability are different than national standards. So those are some of the things we need to start to address, is the difference between local affordability compared to what national affordability may say. Similarly, you can see in this chart, the very top right, is we have a deficiency of units on the very low end. So those typically subsidized houses for those individuals making under 25,000. We have a deficiency of about 2,400 units in that very and extremely low income ranges. Similarly, then, as we go to the higher side, we also have a deficiency in that mid to upper end housing. Our housing market really in Oshkosh right now is very squished down. A vast majority of our units all fall within kind of one category, and we lack that diversification of housing type, which is really one of the things that's led to some of the affordability issues we have, is people who can maybe afford or be willing to take on higher end housing right now are moving down into that smaller market and then taking up units that other people may need. Looking a little bit more at our population growth scenarios, now we're moving kind of from the ACS and census data onto some market analysis that was done by the consultants. Here you can see three different lines. The first, the blue, being the 2000 through the 2020 growth rate. The 2000 to 2020 construction rate being the yellow line, and then the 1990 to 2020 growth rate. As you can see, if we had continued our growth rate from the 90s, we would be at about 71,300 people. But sometime in about 2020, or just before 2020, our growth curve really started to flatten out. So our growth curve fell behind from what it had been previous to that. Looking at housing production estimates to meet our population needs, potentially moving from 2020 to 2030. This slide says, based on our current estimated population growth, which again is a little bit lower than our peer communities, we would need to add about 1,700 new housing units between now and 2020. That's about an increase of about 25% over what had been in the last decade. So we do need to start to encourage some more housing development here in the city to meet the needs, because our development is falling behind of even what the low growth we have. So we do need to address both of those factors. Looking at where those housing breakdown, the different diversification or types of units that we would need to meet the market demand of what our city is presently growing at, is about 1,000 units in the owner-occupied section and about 700 in the renter. And then it further breaks those down into some of those rental categories and home cost categories. So you can see, the very low end, the affordable housing, less than 150,000, just based on construction costs and some of those things. Those aren't new units that could be brought online. We will need to accommodate those units through the existing housing stock with rehab things of that nature. And then the new units coming online, you can see kind of in those other categories. For example, renters under 650,000, we would need to add about 160 of those units over the next 10 years. So we do need to kind of increase that balance back between ownership and rental to make sure we're meeting what our demographics say we have. We're, about that 55-45, and we need to make sure our housing stock reflects that. We're, over the last number of years, we've had about 80% rental to 20% single family. This just further then breaks down the fact that there's a need to diversify that type of housing. Our housing needs really can't be met by a single housing type. We can't build all high density multifamily. We can't build all traditional single family. We need to have a mixture and starting to mix up those housing densities, whether it be, more townhomes and attached single family that have a little bit higher density, or those small multifamily units, 3-4 unit multiplexes, to really help share that cost burden out and get rents and mortgage costs to a more achievable level. So then from there, we moved on to kind of housing policy. So as we were going through this process, kind of 4 basic strategic questions were identified based on the survey data, the market analysis, and the demographic information. And those 4 are: how do we build the resource capacity to develop affordable and attainable housing? How do we encourage housing products that retain our households as their needs change? So aging in place, growing families. How do we conserve our neighborhoods and preserve their housing resources? So although we do need to increase our housing and meet those housing demands, we don't want to do something that's also going to negatively impact our existing neighborhoods. And how do we address the needs of people who are unhoused or inadequately housed presently? So the next couple of slides, we're going to break this down a little bit further. So first, how do we build resource capacity to develop affordable and attainable housing? Some of the policy analysis done by the consultant is, there are options for potentially front-end public financing, introducing new types of products into the market, looking at gap financing to increase affordability, or construction period financing, again, to achieve economies of scale and affordability, and then really working with some of our nonprofit development capacity to see if they can help us further meet those needs. Second question is, how do we encourage those housing products that retain our households as their needs change? And that's, recognizing that multiple development goals could have the new spin-off benefits, meaning whether it's ADUs, increasing the market we don't have there, or increasing duplex and triplexes, making sure we meet different sections of those goals. And new products then open up existing supply. So, if we built some extremely low income housing, maybe we'd get some people out of the little bit higher end housing that they can't afford, remove some of that cost burden on them. If we did find a way to provide maybe some townhouse or row houses in the mid range, maybe some people move up and create more affordable housing for those individuals that need it in the lower markets. So looking at ways we can kind of unsquish that housing market that we presently have. And then, incorporating things like universal design standards. So as we have people aging in place, we're not only meeting the affordability needs, but their accessibility needs for their development. How do we conserve our neighborhood and preserve their housing resources? So a couple of ways that potentially that could be done. We could revise our programs to design and maintain streamlined efforts. So making it easier for people to go through programming. Maybe we need to look at new programming and build out that expand our nonprofits to have additional funding for them. Maybe changing how we do design guidelines for infill housing to make it easier and more compatible with existing neighborhoods. Maybe working with Oshkosh to increase housing standards for students and make sure that their needs are met, but making sure we're not cost burdening it. And then how do we invest in neighborhoods to make sure the projects meet the needs of all the neighborhood? Do we need to look at more small scale commercial in our neighborhoods to give people a little more walkability and accessibility in their areas? 4, how do we address the needs of people who are unhoused or inadequately housed? So this is stuff that some of it's already been started to be worked on, and looking at a community-wide service consortium. I know the Housing Authority at Winnebago County is already starting to work on that. We can get more involved, with some of that. How do we deal with food and shelter? Our tiny homes and supported assistant living options, something we need to be looking at. The city right now is potentially working with a developer who's looking at a tiny house project. And then how do we, make sure we have sufficient human services within our city? And that includes potentially more tiny home type development to meet their needs. So kind of the path forward, we really need to look at kind of four pieces as we start to build out new and additional programming for the city. Obviously, the first one is the big one, affordability. How do we make sure we're helping improve affordability within our community? How do we help with innovation and new products that can be more affordable, more attainable for more people in our city? And how do we deal with location and retention, making sure we have housing styles for everyone that may want to live in the city, and make sure we keep people living in the city and don't have them moving out to other communities? And then how do we encourage further reinvestment in our established neighborhoods? So just a couple of points on each of those. Some of the things we could potentially do for affordability: encourage development of moderate and medium cost housing. Right now we have single family homes that are in the higher market. Can we help bring that down to more moderate or medium costs? And how do we achieve kind of those multiple spectrums of price points to make sure we're meeting different people's needs and not just having a single housing type built? And then how do we provide options to try to stop people from moving out of the city and want to stay in the city? Are there different housing types they need? Is there infill housing that we can do to help meet their needs? And then how can we help with the risk of developers developing new housing types? One of the things we frequently hear, as we look at, okay, should we have more townhome, row house development, is, developers and builders in our area have not done a lot of that. There's some skepticism and some risk adverseness to wanting to do that. So can we help them with understanding the needs of our market and encouraging them to do those no housing styles? And then how can we provide positive incentives for housing and mixed use development through reinvestment in our communities? So some of the things we can do is, look at partnership ideas with other public-private sectors, whether it be large business owners in the city or our nonprofit communities. So can we find new moderately priced products? Can we appeal to urban families and older adults? So we're, encouraging some of the younger families to move into the city while making sure our older adults are still taken care of. How can we make sure market rate rentals don't get too high that we have a negative impact? And how do we still provide enough housing options for everybody who wants them? And then how do we preserve and build housing? Some of the components to do those could be looking at working with a community development corporation or a CDC that could help assist with financing and capital to developers as they try to build out new options in the city. Obviously, the city getting more involved. And then, like I said, working with public and private partners, making sure we continue to work with like the Housing Authority and community agencies to meet the needs of our community. So that is my entire presentation. Now at this point, I kind of want to open it up to questions, comments. One of the goals we've really had as this study was done is to seek as much public input as we can during the process. If people want to unmute, ask a question, give us their thoughts. If you want to type them in chat, really whatever people feel. Any way you'd like to give us feedback, we'd really like to hear it.
Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've talked to you a few times, but, I think your study came up with median household income around 51,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's like 52 and change.
Okay. And then as far as I know, the median price home in Oshkosh by national standards is still half price, but it's getting to read around 170, 180,000. So that prices those people out of buying a home in a conventional sense. And I just wonder what type of things we could do, to move those people into home ownership. Did we ever think about doing like cooperative things, like they own their own unit, or duplexes where they could afford it by renting out the other half? That we'd actually have somehow be able to they'd be able to duplex and you'd be half landlord and half homeowner. They could do that way.
Yep.
I was just
Well, that,
wondering what are some of these new ideas to be able to get people to do that. You said we need new moderately priced products. So I was wondering what you thought, what some of those ideas were.
so right now there's a couple of things identified in the plan that could potentially help with that. One is looking at making it easier for people to do owner-occupied duplexes. Right now, our zoning ordinance is really prohibitive on the ability of people to do duplexes. And there's definitely an avenue there to make duplexes easier. So you could have an individual who, like you said, they live in half of it, rent out the other half. Accessory dwelling units are a great way to increase affordability of units for people. They can live in portion of it and have a an ADU in a garage or in the basement that they can rent out to help offset their costs. One of the things we can look at is development standards, making smaller lots so people can build smaller homes to get some of those costs to come down. For developers looking at building out a subdivision, if they can get 30 lots instead of 22 lots, it potentially, it lowers their cost, which lowers the lot cost, which lowers the home price. So looking at some of those ways that we can maybe increase density a little bit without overly negative impacting the neighborhoods they're in, and just bringing in some of those styles of housing that typically lead to a lower cost than maybe traditional single family would.
The hard part is I think we still have so many people. I've lived in a duplex all my life. I grew up in a duplex. I still live in a duplex, and you know, uh, it's getting people over the hump to think that not everybody should have a single family home and maybe a duplex. I remember years ago, this is 10 years ago, like when people were going out to buy, only 4% of people were actually looking to have an owner occupied duplex. And I just wonder how we could sell that more.
Yep.
I don't think we sell that, you
Yeah,
know?
and I think you're right. There needs to be some public outreach and public participation in getting that type of housing style on there and helping people understand the benefits of it. And I think potentially it's not only duplexes, but maybe it's triplexes or small 4-unit apartment buildings that fit nicely into neighborhoods
Yeah.
that can help reduce some of that cost burden.
I think most people don't realize the same rules apply for owner occupied between 1 and 4 unit buildings. They can
Yep.
actually buy a fourplex and live in 1 unit and still get these federal housing programs, as owner occupied. And I just don't think that people are aware of those options.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely a public outreach piece of what we need to do here is make sure people understand there are some of those options available to them.
hmm Because the way it is right now, I'm my income isn't 52,000 a year. So I couldn't go out. I own 6 duplexes, but I couldn't go out and buy a single family home myself. So
Mhm.
I think we really have to get people to think out of the box more on these accessory housing units. I mean, I tell people sometimes I think a 3 bedroom, 1 bedroom duplex. When you're young, you could live in the 1 bedroom, you have a family, move into the 3 bedroom, and move back into the 1 bedroom when you get older. But it's really going to take a little bit more out of the box thinking.
Yeah, no, those are great comments. I think you're definitely hitting on some of the things the study is suggesting we do.
Okay.
It does look like we have some people with their hands raised. Eric,
Hi, my name is Eric Fluck. Can you hear me?
yeah, if you could speak up just a little bit.
All right, I'll try to do that. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Um, would this be an appropriate time for manufactured housing to be looked at as a viable option for infill?
Yes, I think you're definitely, that is something that we need to look at because manufactured housing can lower that price per unit type of cost to make it easier for people.
Absolutely, and I think um, it really comes down to an education and looking at what today's manufactured home looks like or factory built home. It's really the predecessor to the tiny house. It's just we've been around for a while. It's not new, but we definitely run into some challenges when it comes to affordability. Um, people see us for that, but then zoning, to get approved. And it's been a challenge, and I think it would be, especially for and I just wanted to make sure that that was being part of the conversation. So I
Yeah,
appreciate.
no, I appreciate it. I think that's some great comments. Manufactured housing in 2020 is not manufactured housing of 1990. Those products have changed, and as long as they can be incorporated into an infill lot in a neighborhood or even a newer area of the city, I think there's definitely some benefit to taking a look at how we can improve some of those ability of people to use those housing options. I guess that the individual, it says, I guess, Kabat, Cabot.
Yep. Hey, my name is Chris Cabot. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Mark and company. I'm just new into the building community. Just actually started building duplexes this last year. I found some property out in Winchester, and I have 2 duplexes going up there right now. I'm building myself. I have looked in the Oshkosh area, kind of a large property to invest in. Anyway, some of the things that I ran into that I think maybe could be addressed, maybe would help encourage people like me invest in the Oshkosh area. Number one is definitely the cost of just setting up the infrastructure. So roads and sewer. I looked at a property and I mean, it's just the cost is astronomical. So if there's any ways for the Oshkosh itself or other ways to financially support that and get people like me in moving, I would be very interested in putting up like smaller 2-bedroom rentals or for sale units. The other thing, and you mentioned on it earlier, but just a way to maybe change some of the building, like the setbacks, trying to improve density. There was just talk, a gentleman was talking about, the duplex type living. For myself, I would rather live in a small home that's right next to another home, not sharing walls, just from the perception of, the noise and the scents and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I would have much preferred to build 2 small individual houses on one property, had that been allowed. I'm talking from Winchester now. I got driven into the duplex just to get the occupancy I'm looking for. But yeah, definitely changing some of those regulations and allowing some smaller houses to share properties that are close. And I'm just here also to say I'm very interested. I'm just getting going, but if there's any way I can help out, I'm looking to get out from underneath corporate America and start working with my hands again. And this is exactly what I'm looking to do. So reach out to me or leave a contact for me to reach out with you, and I'd love to partner up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Beth.
Yeah, I'm curious what the direction is for the lower income housing. And are there incentives for individuals to be building that kind of property? Because that's what I see and I deal with all the time is individuals that, can only afford the $650-ish a month rents, and there's just nothing available, as clearly your grid showed.
Yeah. So the very low and extremely low income housing are the most difficult because the private market generally cannot sustain it themselves. So the city does, need to continue to look at ways we can help with developing that type of housing. That's generally subsidized housing. The open market doesn't build it. So whether it's looking at additional TIF assistance for people doing that, or looking at other financial incentives, that is one that we know we're going to need to work on with council, is to try to establish how we can aid in that extremely low and very low income housing, because we can't expect the open market to develop it. We're going to have to get involved and see what we can do to assist with that, to meet those needs in our community.
I don't know all that's involved with this, but in other communities, there have been any kind of new apartment or multi-family living, there have been strategies on at least a certain percentage they have to be able to offer for a low income to kind of make that more of a mixed use apartment type of complex.
Yeah, we're seeing that in a lot of communities, especially the Madison and Milwaukee, where they're getting
Mhm.
tax or not, excuse me, LIHTC credits, low income housing tax credits,
Mm.
especially in the Kelly, if I say this wrong, please help me. The 9% tax credits. Unfortunately, products in our local markets are struggling to get those 9% tax credits to do those mixed use developments. They're having to look at more of the 4% tax credit markets for LIHTC housing, which is where maybe the city needs to further assist with some of those other products. And then we can get some of those multiple rent levels within a single structure. It is something we know. One of the policies and decisions that need to come out as we take this forward to council is developing additional strategies and mechanisms for assisting with that. Other comments, questions?
Yeah, I know we've talked about this before, Mark, but we both know that most of the naturally occurring affordable housing, those that are not subsidized, that don't have tax credits or TIF funding or anything, is the small business landlord. And most of those people own 2 to 3 units, but cumulatively provide the bulk of the naturally occurring affordable units. And those are in our older neighborhoods, and some of them do need work, but there is $600 to $700 to $800. That's where they primarily are in the cheaper stuff. And I'm just wondering, the city really hasn't taken a look at preserving some of that stuff, and the programs they had, as we've discussed, just isn't adequate to do that. And on the scale that they are, that the TIF funding, the tax credits, all that stuff goes way over these folks' heads and just doesn't apply. So what can we do to preserve our existing affordable housing, which is most of our older housing stock, and that's what I own and that's what I live in. So
Yeah, one of the study recommendations is really to go back and reevaluate our existing programming and consolidate programming. So instead of trying to spread the money out to too many programs with low ceilings, is to consolidate it down to more targeted, identified program with higher ceilings. So potentially, instead of only offering $30,000 loans for reinvestment, maybe it needs to be 50, 60, 75,000. And we do a lower number of them per year to have a greater impact on the affordability of a specific unit, so people can really take a lot better advantage of it.
Yeah, as you well know, almost all the money for redevelopment and for development is going to, large agencies and developers, while the small guys pretty much are doing it on their own. And I think it doesn't even have to be that there's funding. It's just got to be an appreciation of these folks and a more friendly environment that said, hey, what can we do to help you? That might even just be education, because it is a really important segment that I think is often overlooked, because there's no way these guys are getting tax credits and all of that stuff.
Yeah, you have a very good point there. A lot of those smaller and medium density level rental units, duplexes, triplexes, so small units, even single family homes, don't qualify under the state TIF laws. So that's not an available mechanism to them. So, the city does need to try to come up with some new solutions on ways to assist those people.
Well, the city of Oshkosh, in with other agencies like the UW Extension and things, twice has held, landlord education days. One in 1999 and one in 2014. And they were both attended by hundreds of people. So these small landlords really did want to get better at what they're doing. So I think not only do you need to improve your properties, you've got to make sure that, these small landlords who really aren't making a living on it, that's why they can rent them out so cheap, is they're not really trying to make a profit on them. They're just, if they pay for themselves, fine, but they do need to be educated and things like that. So I think that it would go a long ways just to have even a rental resource day, where you'd have a day, maybe not even just for landlords or renters, that people could have, even the city could present each of their departments, what's available and who you contact and those type of things. Because when you've done it in the past, they were overwhelmingly a success.
No, I think that's a great idea. That's something we can, without question, look into. Yeah, I think that's a great option. Other comments, questions? This has
Hey,
been
Marc.
really good. I appreciate it.
Marc, this is Lauren Potter. Hi,
Yes.
Chris. Hi, Beth. I guess I know at least a few people on this thing here. And as a medium size with 34 units in the city of Oshkosh and 4 units in Omro, I get a little bit of a different outlook on this. I also am not getting any TIF credits or anything like that on any of our properties. What exactly are you going to bring forth, Marc, when you talk to the planning commission and to the city council? Like, are you bringing a definite plan? Like, is it going to say this, this, and this? Because I read the 128 pages of that report that you kind of just reiterated here in the beginning of this, but I didn't hear any concrete plans. It's kind of or like strong suggestions. It's kind of like, well, we need this and we need this and we need this and we need this, but none of it says, okay, this is how we should get from here to here. We want to change UDU zoning to include 6 people in unrelated, or we want to change zoning from these big sections to be available for duplex, triplex, and quadplex, or because the overall layout of your zoning was redone not so long ago.
Mm-hmm. So there are 2 different steps. The first step of what's going to Plan Commission and Council here in March is adoption of the plan. Once the plan is adopted, our first priority is to go back to Council after adoption to work with them to identify what goals they want us to work on first. Once we get some direction from Council on it, specifically which goals of the plan they want us to work on, we're going to start on that implementation of what are we going to start to do in terms of the zoning ordinance changes, funding of programming. So the first step is getting the plan adopted, and then we'll be coming back with specific recommendations and implementation planning.
But let's just say they didn't tell you exactly what they're looking for. Can you present to them, 4 major places where you think that this, because the plan pointed all over the place. It just is, it's fine, but it didn't pinpoint any like it was like, well, we need a lot of things,
Yep. Between adoption of the plan and starting that workshop, working with council on those goals, that's what staff is going to be working on, is putting together specific recommendations to council. We don't want to just throw the whole thing at council and expect them to be able to give us very specific direction. Staff is going to be starting to put together some categories of things that can be done to start that discussion of exactly what to be done. We're not just going to give them a broad plan. We're going to start to really narrow it down with some ideas for them.
So do you have any of those ideas right now that you can share with us, or?
Yep. So I don't have a lot of specifics yet. We have talked about some of them here tonight with looking at changing funding mechanism of our existing programming, upping ceiling limits. We are specifically already looking at how we can make duplexes easier to do in the city. So those are some of the ones that we already know we're going to be moving forward with in a short order. There's a number of other things we're already starting to look at and evaluate, but I know those are 2 that seem like they're relatively achievable pretty quickly.
Okay, and would there be changes of the zoning ordinances in certain areas then?
Yes.
Would you be going?
Yep, we'll have to update the ordinance to achieve some of these goals. For example, the duplex one will take updates to our zoning code.
Okay. And as we all know, anyone that builds or does anything in this town, it's a very known problem and this isn't in your department, but it's our permitting process in Oshkosh. And unfortunately, a lot of guys don't want to raise their hand and say this is a big problem, but they'll all talk about it behind closed doors. You won't get, the contractors in this town raising their hands because they don't want to get slapped. And it is a huge problem. $50 to put in a sink is just ridiculous. $85 to just pull any kind of a permit. The amount of money that is generated just by permitting processes is atrocious, and it stops guys like myself from improving it, or improving things behind the scenes and not pulling a permit because a roof is a $200 permit. Meanwhile, if you do this in Green Bay, there is no permit unless you do changes to structural parts of the home, which I totally get. But putting a sink in where a sink was before should not be a $50 fee. And it's a penalization. They penalize you. I mean, we get notices all the time just because someone has a boat parked on the road. It's not my boat, it's a tenant's boat, but no one goes and knocks on the door and says, hey, you're not supposed to have a boat parked in the yard. They don't know that. This guy just moved off the lake, is trying to sell the said boat. But we get a pink slip and an angry thing to our house, and it just gets old at all times from these guys.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Like you said, it's not specifically my division, but Miss Nyforth, who is our community development director, does oversee both inspections as well as planning. So it's some nice feedback to hear that we can, there's things that maybe we can work to improve for you.
But it is over and over. You can call Bolt, you can call Myron, you can ask them, what is wrong with Oshkosh? Why aren't you building these big things there? And they will tell you exactly that comes down to some of the permitting problems. And especially with
excuse me. I'll let you go. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh, you're fine. I mean, we have a bad tenant that we had to evict out of a basically kind of it's a UMU kind of place where people can rent for $400 a month a room and then have this. It is what it is. You just need some of these kind of things. But she calls the city, and now I just swallowed $7,455 in costs to have to, improve this thing, that thing, and this thing. And this is an old, not so great thing. Therefore, I don't make money in this unit for the next 10 years. And, everyone says, oh, boo-hoo, Dr. Potter, but I'm not just alone in this. So.
Mr. Potter, if you want to, we can talk. If you have other concerns, I can give you a call sometime and we can talk about it.
But it's a big part of even building. Like Chris was just saying, he wants to put up a duplex, and I would tell him it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to do that duplex in Winchester than it is in the city of Oshkosh. We flipped 2 houses in Omro. Marty Johnson was a call away and wanted to make it better as we were redoing a house that was a complete dilapidated piece of crap.
Well, like I said, like Mark said, we value your input and always are looking for ways to improve.
There's only 8 of us on, so it's just a big part of doing this kind of stuff. And I've been doing this for 3 years now and bought a lot of Oshkosh and want Oshkosh to grow because obviously it's where I live and everything that I do. So.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I do think that the city of Oshkosh does have to have a change in culture and become more user friendly, and certainly appreciate people, small investors that are, like myself. I only own 6 duplexes, but that was still $500,000. But you have to start appreciating folks like Lauren and these small investors that are actually investing in your community. And I think that's you have to create a friendly environment to do that.
Good. And I'm willing to take any comments you have, so keep coming.
And Mark, I do think it makes complete difference to be able to do, because this has happened in Seattle, et cetera, in these bigger towns. We're kind of having similar problems. So they added on ADUs. I don't know how people are going to get plumbing out to an old garage in the middle of Oshkosh. That's going to be just about impossible without a bunch of bucks and putting this thing under the ground. And that's going to be, I don't think people are going to put ADUs up when it gets down to the pricing. I do think splitting a lot in half and being able to have less setbacks and be able to do that is a great idea. I also think that what they did in these bigger towns is they allowed people to do more of a, we would call them rooming houses here, but what they are is literally you have a 4-bedroom house downtown and you got 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, you can have 4 different people living in that home, each paying $350, $400 in rent. And this includes people coming directly out of UWO, you know, because you got to set culture in your house. It can't be just a bunch of hoodlums, which we've experienced with this house. It's just, I mean, it's mass turnover, and it's, you know, it takes a lot of time out of our day. But otherwise, if these people can kind of live like they, you know, if you want young professionals to stick around, which is what I want, and not scattering off to Nina or, you know, up to Kimberly, I want them sticking here. But if we can take some of these older houses that are, you know, some of the Victorians and things like that, that people just are not living in and moving out to the west side to Algoma and things like that, if they can live in a 5-bedroom, 2-bath house and you can put 4 unrelated people in, even though it's not within the UMU planning district, I think that you will get a lot more buy-in to that, and it will drive the cost down exponentially.
Good. That's a great comment. I think that's definitely something worth looking at. How can maybe achieve some of those densities and get people into, you know, whether it's a rooming house type situation or just, you know, smaller rental type situations to increase density and help with affordability.
Not only that, but it is, I mean, which is why all the campus guys have made a good amount of money in their lives down there. But on the investor side, if I buy a much more decent house with a decent setup and make it so it's, you know, set up with 3 refrigerators, each person gets a refrigerator, a bigger kitchen, a common living space. Not only that, but if I'm charging $500 a month, I'm getting $1,500 for that unit. I'm making a better living situation for these people. And at the same time, I could have only rented that house for $1,000 a month.
No, that's some good comments. Other thoughts, comments?
Well, you know, I've talked to you about this before, Mark, but I just wanted on this recording is, you know, the demographics in our community are not going in a positive socioeconomic way, in that our older segment is growing faster than our younger segment. And I'm a baby boomer myself. There's just not going to be enough room or financing to put everybody in senior housing or nursing homes. That we really make a provision for caretaker and mother-in-law apartments, similar to what he was saying in our older homes. And we could allow, I mean, we all know what it costs to put in a nursing home. I think it's $7,000 a month. I mean, we can put a mother-in-law or caretaker's apartment in a larger home where an older person is. I think we really got to start looking and thinking about those things as well. Because we both know also the number of people is dropping per household. But I really think reusing and our existing properties in a different way, like he was saying, will go a long ways. And I am really scared of what's going to happen to, as our demographics are shifting to older, how we're going to house all these folks.
Yeah, and that was a very clear during the community survey portion, was finding improved ways to work through multi-generational housing. That was definitely a theme that we saw during this study.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I brought that up.
Yep, on average, individuals are staying in their homes approximately 10 years longer than previous generations. So that's a pretty substantial difference.
Yeah,
we need to find ways to address.
I also wanted to mention too is that you know, up until, I don't know, a few decades ago, we always looked at a renter as young people waiting to buy. And there's a huge segment of older renters now. And I don't think that a lot of people are aware of that, you know, so.
Mark, I think one other good thing for planning wise is make this easy for people, because there are people sitting on the sidelines with money, willing to do things that you know, are putting money in the stock market, but would like to get involved in something else, especially with, you know, tremendous gains over the last few years, but probably entering into more of a bear market now. And now real estate gets a little bit more more attractive. And the real thing is that you know, if potential investors can meet with Blue Frog or Titan and find out what these people do and the property management side that they do. If you can marry them up to the investor, so these people don't have to deal with the evictions and all that kind of stuff. And we've been willing to just go at it, and we just are learning as we go. But a lot of people don't want to do that. I mean, I'm just speaking for some of the guys I work with at work, and always ask me about this. And on the same side of that, it would be, I don't think they even want to think outside the box. I think if you had set drawings, which, if I go out and get drawings for a specific lot or something like that, I mean, it's probably going to run me 20 grand just to get drawings, which is just money just burned, maybe a little bit less. But if there was a set drawings of what this would look like, and you could get those, and somehow there was a package that I could, buy from Menards or Nofke or whoever in the area would just provide that, and then I just have to find this contractor that's going to put up this dwelling, it makes it so much easier for me to just click yes.
Yep. So it's actually something we are currently working on, is a plan book where we work with, Wisconsin Building Supply, Nofke. There's a number of them out there,
right,
to help establish some housing options that meet the character of our neighborhoods. And maybe it's a duplex, maybe it's a single family, maybe it's just two-story marriage ranch, but helping get some of those plan sets drawn up that can assist with exactly what you're saying. Remove maybe one of the barriers or obstacles for people, to give them an idea and help show them, for X cost. Now, obviously, costs are going to change as prices change in the market, but at least give them a general idea of, here's a rough estimate of what you can put on this property and roughly what it would cost. So that is something that we're already starting to work on, because we do definitely see that benefit.
Okay. It's just to make it easy, because not a lot of people want to do research after research after research,
Yep.
but they would click button yes, and it would be, let's just say it's Cypress Homes, click yes. They build this threeplex, yes. Titan Properties comes in and takes care of my maintenance, yes. And they can just push the button. I think you would find that and it just goes, and everyone is already dealt with each other, so they know what the heck to do in the area, and they push that button. I mean, I just think there'd be a ton of people that would just say okay, and I haven't heard that anywhere else. And I mean, I listened to enough podcasts to probably kill a moose on this stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things that's identified in the plan is working on essentially what's considered a community development corporation. That basically it's a combination of the type of individuals you just spoke about, maintenance companies, financiers, working with our banking community, landlords, to help pull together resources, and that resource can just be knowledge that we can use to help assist new people that are potentially looking at doing it. So we can provide them a list of potential contractors, or provide them some information on banking options for gap financing or construction financing, and say, you can go directly to banks A, B, or C that are partnering with the city, and they can help you with your financing. You can go to X, Y, and Z, and they can help you with maintenance. That's something that is a model that's been done a lot recently in like the Iowa markets, of putting together those community development corporations to assist people with that process and make it so there's known individuals that they can go directly to with help, and make it a lot easier on them.
Sounds good.
Other comments, thoughts? Anyone else? That I really do appreciate everyone that taking some time out of your evening to come. I think this has been some great communication and feedback, and ideas shared that can definitely help us during this process.
Just one more thing, if you could email me the link to this so I can share it with some other folks that weren't on tonight. I regret that only 8 people were here.
Yeah, give me a day or two. Our media services will kind of wraps it up and puts a nice pretty bow on it for me, so I can get it shared out to you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other comments? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up there. Again, I do want to really thank you for coming out. in the end, the study's only going to be as good, and the implementation's only going to be as good as the community feedback and community support we can get on it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for